We at Tree Speech strive to bring you insightful stories about trees and those who engage with them. As we continue growing, we ask for your support. We now have a Patreon, and every dollar helps us continue to produce this podcast. Find the link in our show notes or at treespeech.com. Every contribution supports our production, and we'll be giving gifts of gratitude, including an invitation to Treehouse, our new virtual community for patrons of all levels. Please also consider passing the word to tree-loving folks and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Every kind word helps. I'm feeling unsettled and uncertain. My emotions are strained by the discord and separation in our communities and world at a time when it seems crucial to be able to work together to help solve the challenges of our present life. Never before have we been so interconnected through technology, yet seemingly so distant from one another. The precious interconnectedness of all life can so easily be lost amid the hustle of the daily grind and the weight of continuous tragic events. Intuitively, I look to the wisdom within trees for answers. Trees as a key to the ailments of our world probably sounds nonsensical or hopefully optimistic, but what if there was a guidance system of sorts that used the themes of nature and the unity of all things to create equitable, peaceful, and just ecosystems? I'm Dory Robinson, and this is Tree Speech, a podcast where we practice hearing the forest through the trees. This week's episode was written and recorded in Massachusetts on the native lands of the Wabanaki Confederacy, Pennacook, Massachusetts, and Pawtucket people, in New York on the lands of the Lenape tribes, as well as the lands of Edinburgh. Tree Speech is co-written and produced by Jonathan Zautner and Alight Theater Guild. This season, we have been examining ways that people commune with and find answers from trees in our quest to uncover solutions to the problems that we face both personally and as a collective whole. Today's guest, John Philip Newell, is an internationally acclaimed Celtic speaker, teacher, and spiritually minded author of several books, including his latest, Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, in which he utilizes the Celtic spiritual tradition to call on the modern world to reawaken to the sacredness of Earth and every human being to heal ourselves and our modern world. Newell speaks of himself as a wandering teacher, following the ancient path of many lone teachers before him in the Celtic world, seeking the well-being of the world. He has been described as having the heart of a Celtic bard and the mind of a Celtic scholar, combining in his teachings the poetic and the intellectual, the head as well as the heart, and spiritual awareness as well as political and ecological concern. His writings, including 15 books, have been translated into 7 languages. In 2016, he began the School of Earth and Soul and teaches in the United States and Canada, as well as leading international pilgrimage weeks in Iona in the Western Isle of Scotland. When we spoke, he was in his office in Edinburgh, surrounded by books and wearing a turquoise and indigo scarf which accentuated his bright eyes. Even more striking was his grounded presence. Soon my own harried pace slowed down to match the steadiness of his deep breaths. Much of what we spoke about involved the concept of what is sacred. The word sacred can be translated as hallowed, revered, or made holy by association with divinity or divine things, by religious ceremony or sanction. I always considered sacred to be distant and lofty, yet John Philip's perspective allowed me to engage with the word sacred in a new way, as something which feels close to home, to the self, and most of all, to the earth. Here is our interview with John Philip Newell. Well, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Dory. It's great to be with you. And Jonathan, thank you for the invitation.
Our pleasure. Celtic wisdom is intuitively available to everyone. Yet, as a global society, we have largely fallen away from what it offers. How do you find your own connection to Celtic wisdom? Where did that start for you?
Yeah, looking back on it, at the sort of conscious, sort of intellectual level, it was something that I became aware of during the time of my university studies. And I remember first hearing a great Celtic teacher speak in public. He was, by that stage, he was 80 years of age, and I was about 20. And to hear this Celtic Christian teacher speak about the sacredness of earth and to speak about the way of nonviolence as the way of true relationship and interrelationship, I realized I was hearing what my soul was longing for, and I hadn't even quite known that I was so longing for it. So I think that's when things began to sort of happen at a more conscious level. But looking back over my life, I think that much of this stream of wisdom was conveyed to me quite naturally and much more in daily life through my Scottish grandmother, who lived with us for a while when I was a boy. So I came very close to her, and I think she communicated with me much of the essential vision and spirit of this tradition without even being aware herself that she was necessarily conveying a tradition that had a lineage and a particular path and particular writings and teachers associated with it. So I think I was breathing in some of that quite naturally through her. I think the other thing I'd want to say is that I think part of the grace of this tradition, and not just this tradition, but many other great spiritual traditions that pay attention to our innate knowing of sacredness of earth and sacredness of every human being. I think these traditions set free or give some language to a type of knowing that I think is ours in childhood. But often it's a type of knowing that is either suppressed or denied or covered over when other sort of cultural, national, religious themes find that sort of instinctive knowing of the sacred inconvenient to nationhood or to religion or culture. So I think that much of this way of knowing, and this is part of what I try to communicate in the new book, it's about awakening to what our soul already at some level knows. So I would speak to that in terms of a tradition that actually just gave me some articulation for what I believe we early on already know.
That actually leads beautifully into my next question. I was going to ask that Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul is a book of Celtic wisdom for reawakening to what our souls know. Can you tell us what has caused this need for reawakening? Meaning, how did we as a collective lose sight of these truths?
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, I mean, one of the important characters in the new book is the 5th century Irish saint, Saint Bridget, who's very much a type of icon of sacredness of the feminine and sacredness of earth. And these two I see as inseparable. and tragically, what we've done to the feminine, we've often done to the earth in terms of subordination or abuse. So one of the features of Bridget that I find so interesting and related to your question is that Bridget is sort of rising in people's consciousness all over the place. I mean, certainly in the Celtic world. And why is she rising in our consciousness now? And I think she's rising in our consciousness because we need her. We need the sort of wisdom that she embodies. So I think that in times of need, and especially in times of urgent need, and we are in such a time in our relationship with Earth and our relationship with the feminine, that voices do emerge in a time of urgent need for those with ears to hear. And I think many of us are eager to hear wisdom that has been neglected or lost. So I think the urgency of the moment is part of why we're hearing these themes rise again within us and among us. And it's never just a matter of regurgitating or repeating wisdom from the past. I think it's always, we're always being called to hear ancient wisdom in new ways. I love what the sort of Jewish mystics speak of when they speak of new ancient words, because it's never just a matter of recovering ancient wisdom. It's a matter of them finding new expression, new application, and new enlightenment for now. So I think that's very much to do with why this is rising in our consciousness in a new way. Part of what I explore in the book is more to do with why was this wisdom tradition suppressed? And I explore that quite a bit in relation to what was happening in the 4th century when Christianity overnight almost got into bed with empire, moved from being quite a persecuted minority within the Roman Empire to almost overnight occupying a place of great prestige and power and privilege. And that didn't come without a price. And the price that empire required, and the price that empire always requires, and I'm not just speaking about the Roman Empire, I'm speaking about how the British Empire has behaved historically, or about how the American Empire behaves. Any nation that tries to dominate the world or to exploit the world for its own well-being rather than for the well-being of all, often finds ways of hijacking religion and making it convenient to empire. So we need to be very suspicious. We need to be asking lots of questions about what on earth was happening in the 4th century. And many of the doctrines that were put forward when Christianity became imperial religion were doctrines that were highly convenient to empire. And one of them was a doctrine that formerly was called the doctrine of creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, in which the imperial church was, I think, under pressure to teach that matter, the universe, Earth, was created by God out of nothing. Because if one neutralizes matter, in a sense, by saying, well, it was created out of nothing, then we can do whatever we want to it, instead of seeing that this stuff, the stuff of the human body, is sacred. How we handle one another in relationship, how we care for the most physical needs of those who are hungry and homeless and seeking sanctuary in our nations. These are holy matters, and how we handle the matter of the body of Earth is a holy matter. So the Celtic teachers at that stage were increasingly seen as inconvenient to empire, and they paid the price by being excommunicated, by being judged, by being condemned, by being written off. Because what the Celtic teachers at that stage in in the Celtic world were teaching is creation was not made out of nothing. And they were instead speaking about creation coming out of the very substance of the divine, which is still somewhat shocking to our dualistic Western ears. We've divided spirit from matter, heaven from earth, the divine from the human. So that's part of what I trace in the book, and it's important that we do some critiquing of what happened in the journey that has led us to fall out of relationship with Earth.
It truly is. You were already alluding to this, but there have been so many terrible things that have happened, even just in the last few weeks in the news and in our world. And in your most recent book, you say that the crisis that we are in the midst of today, whether ecological, political, or societal, stem from the fact that we treat the earth and one another as less than sacred. How can people start to see themselves and the earth as sacred, especially given that so many people see themselves as separate from the earth and the environment?
Such an important question. And, over my years of teaching and leading retreats, and for me, it's never just a matter of teaching. I always try to accompany teaching with spiritual practice and meditation, so that it's not just a matter of becoming conscious up here, but it's trying to pay attention at a deeper level as well. So, when I'm teaching, I just never agree to go straight from teaching into discussion. I always, either myself or with a colleague, lead us into a time of meditation. Sometimes very simple walking meditations outside. I mean, if I'm on my favorite island in the world, the island of Iona out in the Western Isles, I immediately put us outside for a while to pay attention within, but also to pay attention to the wisdom that the earth is forever trying to speak to us. And then out of that time of silence and meditative practice, I believe we approach a deeper place of knowing, which is more of a balance between head and heart, or it's a type of equipoise between head and heart. And I think that's a deeper place of knowing and of experiencing the sacred, so that it's not just a matter of hearing about it. I mean, I think a lot of our religious tradition has been based on statements about the sacred rather than an experience of the sacred, or opening ourselves to an encounter with the sacred within us and within one another and within the earth. And I think that one of the main challenges around knowing sacredness in one another and in earth is that many of us have been sort of paralyzed by doubting the sacredness of our own being. So one of the meditative chants I have worked on in collaboration with a musician is set to words from the Quran. And the words are, whichever way you turn, there is the face of God. So sometimes when we're using that, I encourage people to look into the eyes of the person next to them, to see this light that comes from within. But at the end of that exercise or practice, I always say now, the most challenging thing now is to go back to your room and look in the mirror and get in touch with the sacredness that you are, that is at the very heart of your being. Because I think one of the obstacles to knowing and being receptive and being attentive to sacredness in one another is that we're often filled with doubt about the sacredness that we bear at the heart of our own being. That's an important aspect in reawakening to what is within us personally, as well as one another. And that's why these personal spiritual practices are very much part of the way forward collectively as well. One of the things that I love to remember from John Muir, who in many ways is the greatest prophet of ecological consciousness in the modern world. one of the things he says is, keep returning to the mountain, keep going back into the wildness, back into the untamed sacredness of earth. And he says, when we go back, our ancient mother love of earth will rise again. And I find that so important, because he's not saying, we don't have to instill a love of earth in one another. Our role, I think, is just to awaken that, what Muir calls that ancient mother love. That is something we're born with. We're of earth. And our love of earth is something deep within us, but it's often been ignored or covered over or smothered. And it's about reawakening it. So how do we keep enabling ourselves to fall in love again with earth? And I think this is so important in our ecological activism and such important movements for change. We sometimes undermine the efficacy and strength and passion of a movement if we don't allow ourselves to keep falling in love, because love is the great fire, it's the great energy, it's the great passion for change. So let's keep making sure that we're being nourished and we're set on fire, because that's what holds the greatest energy for change.
That's an incredible thought, that falling in love is what we need in order to bring about change, and what we need in order to nourish ourselves. So you mentioned before John Muir, and you mentioned that in your book, you walk through the lives and teachings of John Muir. And we have been examining John Muir and all his complexity this season. Can you expand a little on why you chose to include him in Sacred Earth, Sacred Soul, and what is your connection to him?
Yeah, well, he was, we claim him in Scotland here as ours, but I am prepared to speak of him as an American Celt. So he was born just down the coast from Edinburgh, where I am. So he's much celebrated here, and just over the wall from our property here is the Edinburgh Botanical Gardens with the John Muir Grove of redwoods. And every year I'm in California and doing some teaching, and when I'm there, I always visit the Muir Woods, and my goodness, it's this natural cathedral of the divine. And when I come back to the Muir Grove here, I realize, these redwoods, they're adolescents compared to the sequoia out in the Muir Wood. So Muir's much celebrated here, and interestingly, he's one of these characters who has been rising in our consciousness more, precisely because we need his voice again. But as you say, he's a person of considerable complexity, especially early on, and part of what has rightfully been drawn to our attention is the racism that he gave expression to and embodied as a young man. And part of what I do in the book is try to say two things in relation to that. One is that he was expressing a racism that was very typical of the fairly narrow, closed society of Scotland, in relation to not having much encounter with relationship with native peoples, people of color, and so on. The so-called other was sort of still quite strange to the narrow culture of Scotland at that stage. So what he was evidencing was very typical of his generation and his culture. That in no sense excuses it, but it's to place it in context as a disgraceful feature of 19th century Scotland at that stage. The other thing I point out in the book is that he evolves, he unfolds, and thank God in very beautiful ways in relation to his openness and closeness to native leaders, especially in Alaska. And I think there's been a bit of forgetting of that, and I think that the sort of over readiness to just denounce without linking that also to a thanksgiving that he became more than that, and that in his own evolution he is a sign of hope. He's a sign of the evolution that we're all being invited into, individually and collectively. So I think that's one of the reasons why I was glad to include Muir in a book that was coming out at this point in time, that I could try to say two things, because I think the two always must be said.
And just the acknowledgement that people can evolve and people can change is so important. So do trees have a place within your practice in spirituality?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've just mentioned the botanical gardens just over the wall. The botanical gardens are so close here that I sort of see it as an extension of my own property. I'm sure it's a dangerous thing to be enjoying the gardens without actually having much responsibility for them. But I get into the gardens almost every day that I'm at home here in Edinburgh, and what a grace it is to move among the trees. And especially I go to the John Muir Grove of giant sequoia. And that for me is day after day here. It is my place of sanctuary. It is my place of prayer. It's my place of meditation, to commune amidst the trees. And I mean, I've had a journey in relation to my own religion of inheritance. I trained theologically as a young man. I became a minister of the Church of Scotland. And about 2 years ago, I realized I needed to relinquish my ordination with the Church of Scotland, realizing that what is most sacred to me, what I'm most passionate about, the church of my inheritance, does not speak this vision of earth's sacredness and the sacredness of every human being. So I think at this stage in my life, I'm even more attentive to, aware of what the cathedral of earth, sea, and sky, including this great redwood grove that's so close to me. Again, I mean, looking back on my journey, I think in many ways what I'm doing by going to the grove every day for my prayer and meditation, I think I'm just sort of returning to much of what I knew as a child. I grew up in a context where we're on farmland, and I know, looking back, that's where I was receiving much of my strength, walking in the woods and in the valley. But my religious tradition hadn't given me language to be more conscious of that being an experience of communion with the sacred. So absolutely. And one of the features of the Celtic tradition that I draw out in the new book is that there's really a lot of radical continuity between the Celtic Christian mysticism and the pre-Christian Druidic wisdom. And the word Druid just means oak knower. And so the pre-Christian context of nature mysticism was happening, again and again in oak groves, or in the presence of great oak trees, these massively strong trees, often of great age, with roots reaching deep into the earth and branches reaching up to heaven. Very much this important connection between the above and the below of heaven and earth.
Very much so. What advice do you have for anyone who is looking to continue to reawaken to Celtic wisdom and to heal the world and our environment? Where do you suggest a person begin?
One of the important chapters in the book is the one on Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the 20th century scientist, mystic, Jesuit priest, who, like many of these Celtic teachers, paid the price for trying to speak truth from the human soul and was silenced for much of his life by the Vatican. And then, thank God, close to the end of his life, he agreed to an act of disobedience. And sometimes disobedience is the holy path, I think, to give voice to an attempt to suppress it. And so he signed over his writings to his personal assistant in Paris, Mademoiselle Mortier, which meant that when he died, all of these writings that the Vatican had not allowed to be published were hers rather than the church's, and she began to release them. Part of what Teilhard writes about in a work called The Heart of the Matter, in which he says that the deeper we move in the matter of earth, the closer we come to the divine. One of the transition points in his life that was so important was when he realized that he could not only sort of stand in front of a tree and love the essence of the tree, love the life within the life of the tree. He realized that in standing before the tree, he could experience being loved by the life within the life of the tree. So he realized it was radically relational, and that it's that radical relationality that we're being invited into, not only to love Earth, but to allow ourselves to know that we are loved of Earth, and to allow ourselves to know not only the love of Earth, but the mercy of Earth. I believe that we can know that the Earth will have mercy on us if we choose and seek to be true to her. That was one of the things that John Muir said: Earth has no sorrows that Earth cannot heal. So let's allow ourselves to be in this sort of radical relationality with the planet and with everything that has being. So I think one of the things that I encourage, again, in terms of spiritual practice, when I'm teaching on Iona pilgrimages or teaching at the School of Earth and Soul, is to encourage people to go out literally and stand before a tree or to stand before some expression of life form, and to have that two-way communication, to not only allow our hearts to try to express what we're feeling towards the essence of the tree or the essence of that life form, and then to move into listening posture and to allow ourselves to be addressed. Because that's the nature of love, isn't it? It's mutual, and it's not just us speaking. It's about listening and to allow ourselves to be changed by what we hear. Of course, that in a culture, in a Western world that had sort of neutralized matter and didn't allow any sort of spiritual energy or presence in it, that just sounds madness to allow ourselves to listen. But I believe that is what we're being called to do, and we're living in the tragedy of not having listened for hundreds of years, and it's brought us to the impasse that we're at now.
But hopefully we can, with your wisdom and with the wisdom of the trees, allow ourselves to be changed by what we hear and allow ourselves a chance to listen.
Yes.
Even when things look dire, you have shown that there is always hope, always an intuitive guidance that leads us towards trusting our innate wisdom, a new way to see things in our world, and to go deeper into the truths of our sacredness and the sacredness of everything around us. We are so honored to speak with you today. Thank you so much for this conversation.
Thank you, Dory. It's been so good to be with you. And Jonathan, thank you so much. Many blessings to you.
The wisdom that is the heart of John Philip's book comes from the Celts. While today we imagine Celtic land as inhabiting Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and Cornwall, when first referred to historically around 500 BCE, the Celts were actually a collection of tribes spanning the whole of Middle Europe, ranging from what is now Turkey to the Atlantic coastline of present-day Spain. In fact, by the 1st century AD, most Celtic territories had become part of the Roman Empire, and by circa 500, Celtic culture had mostly become restricted to Ireland, Western and Northern Britain, and Brittany. Between the 5th and 8th centuries, the Celtic-speaking communities in these Atlantic regions emerged as quite a cultural entity with a common linguistic, religious, and artistic heritage that distinguished them from surrounding cultures. The Celtic spiritual traditions are rooted in peace, aiming to facilitate 3 conditions: an opening within the human heart, a sheltering sense of solace in the world for those who struggle, and an ongoing sensual celebration of the beauty of life. The early Christian Celts were able to see a divine presence in nature, one that stressed humanity and dignity for all. One way in which ancient Celtic practice incorporated nature is that rituals were all conducted outside, near, and with sacred trees, oak trees specifically, called nematons. Nematon is a Celtic word and means holy grove. Nematons can be found across the Celtic world, including Spain, France, Ireland, and Scotland. The Celts have long been a people who appreciate the mysterious nature of the space between where one thing ends and another begins. Transitional periods of any sort are considered sacred because they provide a gap or window into higher dimensions, and even include the time of death. Dusk, dawn, the time between day and night are seen as points of mystical power. Within the liminal places is where we can most easily access the wisdom of the spiritual world. John Philip strikes me as someone quite brave to engage with these liminal spaces, studying and teaching with those of various faiths, challenging himself to work outside of the designated church structures, and putting himself in places where he can ask questions rather than simply sit with answers. Using this Celtic wisdom, John Philip reminds us that it is each one of us who decides what is sacred, and that sacred simply means to set apart. For each of us to actively elevate that which is truly special from what might be pedestrian or mundane. It was interesting that John Philip explained how certain voices speak to us and gain prominence in times when they are needed most. For example, John Muir, as well as Saint Bridget, the patron saint of many things, including poetry, learning, healing, protection, blacksmithing, livestock, and dairy production. She is also celebrated for her generosity for the poor. Bridget's feast day is February 1st, which was originally a pre-Christian pagan festival marking the beginning of spring. Next year, 2023, for the very first time, St. Bridget's Day will be marked as a public holiday in the Republic of Ireland, the first named after a woman. It's remarkable that at a time when we need her words the most, she is celebrated by the entire nation. They chose to honor her and her wisdom and to set that day apart from others. It seems difficult, but to recognize something in this way is fairly simple. As British writer Stuart Wilde once wrote, "How do you make something sacred? You say, 'This is sacred,' and you treat it that way." Thank you for joining Tree Speech today.